important. And then as you let people in, I can read the statement.
Just through 8 ranges, through 12 ranges.
Okay, so now that we're recording, I'll start again with the statement. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in the new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in the new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So there we have it on that. And Dominique, when you can, we can pull up the slides just so that everyone can see the agenda. And actually, while you do that, I can just actually read the agenda. So we've just done the welcome and call to order. I've just read the statement. We'll do a roll call in attendance. And really, since we've, for the most part, introduced ourselves during the last meeting, we don't need to go through the introduction process again. But what I will ask is that for anyone who wasn't in attendance for the last meeting, if you do have a comment, we hope you do, or some feedback to share, if you could just give some context or background very briefly about who you are, maybe who you are and your affiliation with this subcommittee. That way we can all be familiar with each other. Then we'll go through our discussion, which essentially means the follow-ups from meeting number 1, and we'll then create a list of resource needs and categorize those resources, and then we'll go through the next meeting details. So a pretty brief agenda. I think the subject will always be a meaty subject in terms of the funding formula as it relates to what's in the best interest of our students, our kids. So with that, we can get started. So we'll roll into the discussion portion.
Before we start, can we do, to make sure that I have everybody in attendance, do a little bit of a roll call? When I first got on, I was able to capture Melanie Allen, Christy Highfield, Tom Marino, Sherry Haig, Dr. Naba, Denny Trey, I didn't write the last name, Blair Taylor. Can I have others? Let me know who's on the call.
Bob Nardo from Libertas School of Memphis. Hello.
Jennings Wilson.
Sonia Stewart, Hamilton County.
Josh Thomas.
Good morning, this is Maya Bug.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Cisnet, are you still there? Do I need to pull up a different slide?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. My apologies. I wanted everyone to share their names for the roll call. I asked if it's not too much of a tall order, would you be able to pull up slides 7 and 10?
Okay.
And if not, I could share my screen if
I can
there's an issue. And so just to give you all some context for this, we spent some time in the last meeting talking about why we're all here, why this is important to us. I thought it was really poignant what Commissioner Schwinn shared a couple of weeks ago with the subcommittee chairs around just the funding formula, the background behind all of this. And there were some slides, while it was all pertinent, and we could certainly see if we can get this full presentation to you, there were certain slides that I thought were relevant, particularly for this conversation. And so the first one is this one, and I'll just read it verbatim. It's the hallmarks of a good formula, the indicators that we'll look for, as well as the questions we'll want to answer to make sure that those are good indices. And so the first one is easy to understand and transparent. Do I know how my child's or student's education is funded and what it includes? Can I explain it? Is the information easy to find? Another indicator is, does it work for all students? Can I easily and clearly name how students with greater or unique needs are supported in a formula? Another one is sustainable and fiscally responsible. Is this a formula that can be maintained by the state in a way that provides stability and consistency for students? Does the formula adequately and reasonably meet the needs of students in our education that our education system serves? And then is it outcomes focused? Are there incentives that support access and opportunity for all students, but particularly those students with the greatest needs, to successfully participate in post-secondary programming? And then lastly, is it flexible? Can changes and additions to the education funding occur within the formula? Do districts have the ability and flexibility to allocate resources in ways that maximize student achievement and best serve local needs? And then slide number 10, which just, there are a few sort of breakdowns of the funding formula, but this is essentially the foundation of it all, to me at least, the potential components of a student-based formula. And I'll start from the bottom, the base. The amount allocated to each student in the state for common education needs, those resources that should be provided to all students in the state. And then there are weights, the weight or multiplier assigned to students based on additional needs identified. And then we go up to direct funding, the dollar amount allocated to students based on specific programs. And lastly, outcomes, additional dollars allocated based on getting stronger outcomes for traditionally higher need student groups. So with that, just again, it was very quick and wanted to give that context and overview. And we, of course, could send that to you or spend some more time discussing it now, but wanted to share that with you before getting into the next question, which really is for you all to share. And this is, again, is an opportunity for those of you who weren't here last meeting to share a little bit about your background. But this is an opportunity for us to share our expertise so that we know who all is in the room, what we all bring to the table. And expertise is a wide range. It could be what you do on a professional level that brings you to this committee. It could be what brings you, or what you do on a personal level, the kids that you have in your own household or kids that you serve in a different function that bring you to this committee. So we'd love to just popcorn style, just share a little bit about the expertise that you bring. And with that, we could then talk about what we want to be true for all students in Tennessee. And so we all don't have to respond, but I would love to have at least a handful of us share some of our expertise. And I know I see some familiar faces that weren't on the call last time. And so just fair warning that if we all aren't speaking up, names will be called.
Derwin, you can always count on me to help break the ice if needed. My name is Bob Nardo. I was a former district employee over operations and finance for the Achievement School District 8 years ago, but now I'm the head of an elementary charter school in Memphis, where we have a really large population of students with disabilities. We actually have the largest students with disabilities population in the Achievement School District. And certainly we've experienced what it means to serve a large population of kids whose needs are 2 to 3 times, what a typical students often are. And I'm glad to be on the subcommittee because it's shocking to parents. I mean, when you discuss that with them, that at the school level, children are funded the same. A typically able child as a child with cerebral palsy. And so I know a lot of the special needs parents in our school that we've met with really, one of the top priorities for them is to make sure that when their child has a significant or special need, those dollars can follow them to the public school that can best serve their needs. And so I'm excited to see that as part of the solution if possible.
Thanks, Bob.
Was that what I was supposed to do, Derwin?
Yes, perfect. Great example. Thank you, Bob.
Derwin, I'm sorry, this is Blair. Would you say again, sort of what would you like from us right now? Just
Yes. Thanks, Blair. Just to share a little bit about your expertise that you bring to this committee. So whether it's a formal function that you do on a professional level, what you do on a personal level, for some it's a combination, and that will help us as a committee to know who's in the room and who we could lean on and what we can bring to the table as we work through this funding formula.
Got it. Well, I'd be happy to go next. I'm Blair Taylor, and I lead an organization called Tennesseans for Quality Early Education, and we're a birth to third grade sort of policy and advocacy organization, and we also support local communities to implement effective practices for quality early education. So our focus is really on third grade reading and math. We're very recognize that there's a continuum, and I think we have a large coalition. We're in touch with a lot of advocates for early education, ranging from parents to educators to organizational leaders to business community leaders. And we every year do an annual voter survey on early education policy proposals. It's very important to our work that there be that our policy proposals that we bring to the General Assembly each year are aligned with our voters. And early education agenda very much is aligned with Tennessee voters across partisan lines. And so we, part of what I would, love to share with this group is that the types of things that I mentioned at our last meeting that we see as important investments and that we would prioritize are very much aligned with what Tennessee voters want. And I'm happy to share that voter survey. We also have in the not too far past done a parent survey of 2,300 parents of children under the age of 5 in Tennessee around childcare needs. So just delighted to share that with you at the right time.
Thanks so much, Blair.
This is Melanie, and I guess I'll go next. And I first come to this subcommittee as a parent, and that's where my heart is. We have 2 grown children in their early 20s, and then we have a 3rd and a 5th grader. And then I'm also, I guess, bringing to the table, I work at a Head Start as an education administrator. The program serves low-income families in Knox County. We have a very large, what we call dual language learner community. What the Department of Education calls English learners. Very diverse community that we're coming from. So those are some of the things that I kind of bring to the table.
Thank you, Melanie. Maybe we could hear from 1 or 2 more. So far, we're getting a good range from the business community, from the school administration community, from the parent community, early childhood space. And so this is really helpful. So far, we can already see how well-rounded we are, but would love to add to that just in terms of knowing what voices are in the room. In case you all were wondering, as a facilitator, the silence is not awkward for me, so we can wait. I can call out names. All right, how about Dr. Maya Bug?
was just going to tell you to call Maya.
I see her video is off. I'm not sure, and she's muted. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go.
Darren, I was just texting you, telling you that I have a cold. I'm in bed, so I sound.
Oh,
I'm just
sorry.
texting. I would normally jump in here, but that's when my video was off, and
I see that now. Oops, sorry, I was in a meeting.
It's okay. Y'all can just hear my voice sounding strange. My name is Dr. Maya Bug. I do have a cold, which I get every 5 years, so this is that year that it has happened. I'm the president and CEO of the Tennessee Charter School Center. We are the state's charter support organization. That means we lead on policy and advocacy on behalf of the almost 50,000 students now that are attending public charter schools. Make sure that they have access to adequate funding so that they can have the high quality education they deserve. My background is in public school education. I started in the classroom and also education policy. I also have a background in doing a lot of equity work, anti-racism and diversity as well, culturally responsive teaching, those types of things, and nonprofit leadership and management. So I am pleased to be here and see so many faces and hear the voices of parents. Thank you for Derwin's leadership. He's been a leader across our state for a very long time now. So pleasure to be here and to be a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you, Maya. Now I feel really bad for having you share your voice, even though you hardly have a voice. So I hope you feel better soon. Thank you for, even though you're not feeling well, being present today.
Thank you, Devin. I knew you were going to call on me. That's why I said, let me text him. I know he's going to call on me.
Well, thank you. And so if we can just get one more person, and we will then move on to the matter at hand, which is really figuring out what we want to be true for our students. So if we can hear from one more voice, and hopefully I won't cold call someone who has a cold.
Well, I can go. I'm Josh Thomas with the Foundation for Excellence in Education, better known as Excel in Ed. We're a national education policy and advocacy shop with a national reach. Our policy set runs the gamut from public and private choice all the way through a very strong emphasis on early literacy, on closing the digital divide, on accountability and assessments in our schools. And on a personal note, I also am a parent and care very deeply about this. And I'm a native of Memphis, though my wife and I live in Nashville now. So.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you for everyone who shared your expertise. And I know those of you who didn't get a chance to or just weren't in position to certainly know your backgrounds, and we are very well versed and well rounded, and I really appreciate that and appreciate you all. And with that, let's jump into the discussion, creating a list of resource needs and categorizing them. If we can go to the next slide, perfect. We'll see that we want to essentially categorize what we're about to share out into must have, should have, nice to have, and long shot. So you could all take a look at this slide if you hadn't looked at it in advance. But the intent of this is for us to really think about what we want to be true for our students and then categorizing those things based on these 4 different categories. And so we could certainly sort those on our own, but as you share out, would love for you to essentially say where you would put the particular area of need. So first, we can start with what do we want to be true for all students, and then we could get into how that would be true. So since we are all very shy this morning, I don't know why, we weren't as shy last meeting. I can give an example. So for just at a high level, I would want all students in Tennessee to have access to a well-rounded education. And what that would mean for me is then the next step of that would be what would need to be true for that to happen would that they would need to have access to arts education. And I would want that for all students. And I would group that into the should have. Sort of, I'm really in between the must have and should have, but at least at the should have level. So that's just an example. So would love for you to build on that or sort of add to that if you would like.
Hey, Derwin, is there always, this Blair, is there a way to kind of pop up a shared document on our Google's doc where where we can see real time kind of the kind of like a whiteboard? That might not be possible for this meeting, but it would be helpful to kind of see the note taking and the kind of listing that's happening as we go, and kind of have the 4 categories grouped, and kind of start typing them under categories together.
That's a great idea. Yeah, and Dominique, do you think that's possible on your end? If
Dominique,
not, I could
need to put
see
you
what
on
I
the
could do.
spot there.
That's okay. I'm just kind of capturing it as you type right now. What I have worked on for a previous group is I went and I read back what I captured today at the end of the meeting, and then I put it in a Google link that I shared with the whole group, so that you all have access to add, edit, and work with it from there. I mean, I'm happy to share with you as I type, but I like to go back and fix it and read it and make sure that I'm capturing everything correctly. But we can try to do something. I don't know if we can do anything that you all have edit rights to right now, but I can
think, Dominique, it would be helpful, and please feel no pressure to have perfect sentences or anything like that. This is just totally rough draft, and I do think it would be great for us to visually see what we're all jotting down and how we're categorizing them. And so if we could just set up those 4 categories, even if it's just in bullet form, and then we can write under those bullets, this could be total, and we can, while this is being recorded, no pressure, this can be something that once we're ready to share via Google Docs, we can polish it, and I can definitely help with that.
Okay, I will get something ready as you all are talking.
Thank you.
Everyone, just in the spirit of conversation, I would agree with you. And from my vantage point, a very interesting thing happened a couple of years ago because the state, increased the requirement for certified PE teachers in elementary schools. And so as a former music teacher, I've always prioritized music in our school. But you're not really like required to offer music, whereas now you're sort of held accountable for your PE. And so it's actually, in a way, I think kind of distorted it a little bit. So now we're sort of required. I mean, I'm not trying to put down the PE piece. I'm just saying like that difference in the regulations around our schools means kids are getting less in the way of arts, actually, because if you have $1 to put towards enrichment, you're sort of more coerced to put it towards PE than to art right now. And so I think that's something that's sort of thrown it off a little bit. So I think adding it to the mix here as a point of emphasis has a lot of value, and certainly parents would like to see more of that.
I appreciate that, Bob. And I think in the interest too, before we even jump into the must have, should have, nice to have, just keeping it at that high level, what are some other things that we would like to be true for all students in Tennessee?
Are you seeing my screen now as I'm typing?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Appreciate that. We went through some of this last time, and there were a lot of really great responses. I saw a lot of head nodding last time. I'll throw out a couple of things that I remember us talking about, that were on my mind. I think the best practice ratios of school nurses and mental health counselors are top of my list. And frankly, we know that voters support that as well. Tennessee voters support that as well. I also just, with deep gratitude for what the governor and the General Assembly did this past session in terms of making resources available for high dosage, low ratio tutoring for children who need it. That strikes me as something that until we have much higher rates of proficiency in 3rd grade reading and math, at least, and frankly, up the chain through high school, that tutoring is a known best practice, and again, it also has voter support, that ought to be a resource available to support children, who are falling behind. I'll start with those three. I got a whole list, but I'll start with those.
Derwin, I'll toss out I think I'm just a basic, and we would think a given, but I know it doesn't happen everywhere. Every child, every classroom has an excellent teacher.
I appreciate you sharing that, Tom. And yes, while it might seem like a basic, I'm so glad you called that out, because in many cases we overlook how important that is. And sometimes it even becomes an assumption that never gets addressed. So it's great to name that.
I'll jump in then. I think what I'd like to see for every student, and this is kind of off of what I said last time, is that we have appropriate pathways for every child so that they can find their way to their success once they leave the public school system.
Would you mind saying
I'll jump in, I guess,
about that? If I could just ask a little bit more, because I love that. What our just said that about every child has their path to success after high school. Would you mind just saying a little bit more about what you mean? I think I know, but I just didn't want to make assumptions, and I loved it.
Well, one of the things that we're really blessed here in Hamilton County is that we do have a lot of different pathways for students. So some students are going to be college bound, some students are not. Some students may have a completely different life goal. I mean, based on their particular needs, based on their ability levels. So it can be whatever their path is going to be that they're able to find success in it, whether it be, a trade that we're offering. We have an amazing welding program here that's putting out kids that are just doing, making great money out of high school. And we've got great college-bound programs. And then there may be kids that have other life goals. So whatever their pathway is, we need to have all pathways open for students to be able to find their way once they leave the public school system.
Awesome.
And just to piggyback on that, this is Sherry, just to piggyback on that, to really think about how that starts in elementary school and how we're providing that environment very early for them to be thinking about and experiencing opportunities as they go through their early educational experience, that we are giving them those opportunities. So when they get to middle school and they get to high school, they have experienced a lot of opportunities, and that then that pathway for them is really clear. As well as going back to the teacher piece, really thinking about, it is important that every classroom have an excellent teacher, and having the resources and support to support those teachers in the classroom so that they can then carry out what excellent education looks like. And that includes getting into those pathways in high school and making sure that we've really prepared teachers to be exceptional for our high school students.
This is Melanie. From last time, someone mentioned, I can't remember who, but I think we should definitely put it on here that that we need to provide needed services to English learners and their families. I guess easier access to those services, which I know is even it's difficult in larger cities, but it's especially difficult in rural areas. In the end, the additional thing, social emotional development is always going to be my soapbox. So programming that supports social emotional development and the development of school families, I think would be a should have.
Hey, this is Berthina hopping in. To piggyback off of that, the social emotional development piece, I would also include wraparound support services that are needed for students to eliminate any disparities that exist, or any barriers is really the word. Not disparities, barriers that exist for learning to take place. As far as having an excellent teacher, we want to make sure that we have highly qualified teachers in the subjects in which they are teaching. As far as the pathways are concerned, when we talk about the pathways, we want to make sure that students are prepared for college, career, or workplace readiness, or just to be able to participate in a global society in a meaningful way, whatever that success is. And someone also mentioned that we should have a strong start in elementary. I really think it should be backed up to early childhood, having a strong pre-K program that sets the foundation for elementary, and that early literacy and early numeracy piece.
Amen.
That will truly prepare kids as they continue to go. Because if we don't get it right in pre-K and elementary, then we set students up when they get into middle school and high school because they don't have the foundation they need to engage in advanced coursework.
I was also going to amen you as well. Can we also add a strong developmentally appropriate pre-K program? So just maybe add the word developmentally appropriate in front of pre-K.
Amen to that too.
Also on the EL piece, we often forget we are providing support for EL students, but there is not financial support given to undocumented EL students that are entering our school system. And when we talk about education funding, every student needs the funding necessary and the resources necessary to be successful. If they're in our schools, we need funding and resources to support them, period.
And there is also a subcommittee that is focused solely on EL students. So might be helpful sometime to listen to one of the recordings of their meetings to see what they're taking care of there.
What about enrichment? I was part of a conversation in Shelby County with Shelby County Schools, and thinking a little bit about summer learning opportunities and how some are opting in, others may not be, and sort of thinking about what are and really the arts question came up about just, engagement and students, being excited about coming to school and feeling positive. And so ways that are kind of go beyond the classroom, if you will, that bring them to learning settings where they're doing other things that don't necessarily feel like school, but that are fun and engaging and play to their interests, from robotics to debate to arts to those kinds of and certainly sports. So just those as a vehicle to just expand and enrich education, but also as a way to sort of draw our children in and make education more than just the classroom.
Another thing that has been on my mind, I think a report went out last week or the week before about the number of teachers that are eligible for retirement. I think we're looking at about 14,000 teachers across the state. And with us having such a shortage already in teachers and support staff, I think that there really needs to be a focus on how we are going to recruit and retain teachers across our state to really support students and student learning.
I also want to add it a little bit to that wraparound service support. I realized when I was talking about enrichment, but thinking about sort of the after school care and activities and time. I think just that sort of out of school time that can be used to sort of enhance numeracy, literacy, STEM kinds of stimulated in a different and sort of exciting setting. But I think the after school part of that is not to be missed. The fact that the children need to be in care and need to be doing something productive and supported.
Blair, can I just say something about that real quick?
Yeah,
I think the after school thing is really a double-edged sword. We do a ton of summer programming and a ton of after school programming at our school because it is a gigantic issue for a lot of our kids who, just because they get out of school at 3:30 doesn't mean that their parents in a neighborhood like Fraser have a great solution for caring for them after school.
Right.
But a very interesting thing that I have learned, having started my career at a KIPP charter school where our school hours were 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., that was the school hours, and then we had an after school program from 5 to 6. There is a huge diminishing marginal return both for teachers and for students in after school. And so we have to think about, I think, after school in sort of a different bucket than the core school day, because it's not necessarily the case that teachers or students have the same energy level after school. And so I think we have to come up with a better solution for after school, but it's also not the same thing as schools can just all have longer school days and expect not realize that there's a diminishing marginal return in that 8th or 9th hour in the building for very young people, or the teachers have been with them all day. So I think this is an issue we have to figure out, but it's probably not going to be solved just through the extension of the regular school day after a certain point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of thinking in terms of partnerships with community organizations, maybe? Is that kind of where what you're thinking is an alternative?
Yeah, like just in our instance, like we have done a lot of work with the University of Memphis Music School. I mean, going back to a point Derwin brought up earlier, we do a ton of music and stuff after school because of how difficult it is to fit in during the school day. And it's a great source for partnerships from the Rudy Scheidt Music School and the community music school that they had in the past and so forth. So, a lot of groups work in Memphis, work with Memphis Athletic Ministries and what they're able to do for kids. So yes, I think this is a ripe for that area. And I even think if that could be addressed somehow through the school funding, that's interesting because then we would be able to sponsor those partners and do some of that piece. But I do think we have to sort of think of it as a different kind of a bucket.
And Bob, along those lines, and this goes with the retirement piece as well, using the quote unquote after school time, but the time that we still have access to our teachers for professional development. I think that helps with the retention piece, just keeping them up to date, up to speed with what's going on, and really building them as much as they build on our kids. It's important for us to provide those opportunities, but still within the hours of service, rather than having them come in on the weekends or stay after hours, quote unquote. I think that sort of ties into the retirement or the retention piece as well as the enrichment piece, because you can maximize that time while students are being enriched through other programs. And so by no means is this list exhaustive, but I think this is a great start. If there's anything else we want to add before we start categorizing these, some are naturally or have been categorized into should have, such as the school emotional development piece. I mentioned the arts piece. So if there's anything else, anything pressing that you all would like to add, we can add that now. But if not, we can start categorizing these into the should have, must have, nice to have, and long shots.
Pressing
just one other thing I want to put out, and I touched on this at first. I mean, one of the biggest learnings for me is the critical importance and the huge challenge of meeting significant special needs. And I think that historically, a lot of charter schools in the state don't meet these needs, but I don't think it's because they don't want to. It's because the current funding model first of all, does not include very much money for special ed. Only a tiny portion of the BEP is for special ed. And then the IDEA, which is federal special ed money, is not passed through to charter schools in many cases. It's controlled at the district level, and some districts offer good programs, others don't. I think, so without getting into all the weeds of that, I simply think there's got to be a part of this in which meaningful dollars based on the actual classified need of the child follow the child to the public school of their choice, and that within each neighborhood, there's got to be a way to have those needs served so the child isn't having to cross town, or what have you. And so I think schools, including charters, but I think also district schools, can do a better job meeting the needs of each child when the dollars follow the child to that school. They can either provide it at that school, or they can work with other schools in the neighborhood to pool those resources so that there can be options throughout. Right now, it's a huge barrier. There's just a lot of schools aren't even an option if you have a significant disability. And that's mostly from a parent standpoint. And I'd say secondarily, but not insignificant, really from a school standpoint, it can almost bankrupt you, right, if you have significant needs. And that ends up creating terrible incentives. And I hate to say this, but it creates bad incentives around student recruitment and enrollment and retention practices, if you know what I'm referring to, among some schools, when they're not even given the chance resource-wise to meet the needs if they want to. So I think this, to me, personally, I think this is the single biggest issue or aspect of this whole funding reform.
Did I capture everything you wanted there, or do I need to add something? It cut out on me for a second.
Bob,
yeah,
does that last?
I think it's just two parts. Yes, I think that the per pupil funding has to vary more in response to the child's needs, and then it has to be able to follow that child so that the public school in which they enroll is either able to meet those needs at their school, or is able to partner with another provider or another school to sponsor those needs being met. Yeah.
And I'd love to just piggyback on that and say two things. One is just that, I think when we think about fiscal responsibility and wanting to meet these needs and not, have a fiscally responsive and responsible approach in our state, one of the things we are not doing near to its fullest capacity is tapping TennCare dollars for the types of services that children, frankly, are eligible for, and that would be a much lower burden on our general fund if we were in fact allowing the TennCare dollars to be used for the services. That's medical services, that's EPSDT services for young children and for children with special needs. And it's really ripe. The time is ripe to be exploring this right now, because, we essentially, get, $3 federal dollars for every dollar that we invest as a state on that. Whereas if, it creates a much better, particularly using EPSDT, creates a much better opportunity to fund children's needs, special needs more fully. But TennCare broadly, and it's a complex issue, but I think the time is right for us to really be looking at that. And the other thing I would just add is, unrelated to that, is just ratios, classroom ratios, and teacher assistants. And that's something that I know with ESSER dollars is being deployed in many districts right now, is adding, particularly in the younger grades, adding a teacher assistant to the classroom to help give more specialized and personalized attention, and we've got to give attention to that.
I think to add on to what Blair and Bob discussed as well is, in addition to students with special needs, students in poverty as well, ensuring that we are providing the resources and the income necessary to support the needs of those students as well and fill in the gap. We just have a shortfall in the amount of money that is provided to be able to support the needs and overcome the obstacles for those students to even allow learning to take place or begin in that classroom. So when you have students coming in with various needs, you need to, the focus largely is addressing those needs before you can allow learning outcomes to even be implemented within those programs. So I think overall, when we're looking at how we distribute funds, it has to be in a more equitable way to truly support student needs. And no matter how we cut the cookie jar, we need more money, period, from the state and how they're funding education as a whole.
If I could just add on to that briefly, I mean, I hate to, this is such a critical point, and in a lot of ways, if you really want to do this the simplest way, particularly when we look at like the social emotional type needs that we were talking about earlier, which are so important, it's obviously it's not 100%, but the correlation is incredibly high with the poverty issues that my colleague, forgive me, I didn't catch your name, was just referring to. And when you look at the statistical relationship between proficiency rates and income and poverty in this data, it's not a straight line, but it's terrifyingly close. And so we could make a very complicated funding model, or we could actually make a pretty simple one that's based largely around remediating. I think you said this earlier, some of the, I think, not boundaries, but obstacles, right? That so often correlate with the poverty challenges, you know, I mean, so I think that would be a very simple way to address this if people were willing to just be honest about it.
So I'm going to throw in a long shot here, and this relates to somewhat, some of this isn't a long shot. I think it's a should have, but it relates to facilities. I think where, particularly students in poverty, but rural communities, more dense communities, it really spans the gamut. Students really are in facilities that are just, whether it's deferred maintenance issues that they're dealing with, whether it's old dilapidated buildings that they're working through, or temporary spaces that have been temporary for the last 10 years that they're still working through. I think facilities challenges continue to be an issue, and not just school facilities, but this is the long shot piece. But this gets to some of what we've been talking about, just some of the other wraparound infrastructure issues that our students face. We expect them to come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but some of our students are coming from places that have not been addressed from an infrastructure standpoint. And so this could be tapping into some of the other funding pools of some of the other departments from the state. But to me, a long shot would be bringing some funding to go towards wraparound infrastructure needs that include school facilities, but also some of the other facilities that support our students, like housing, health and wellness facilities as well.
Can I just make a comment to Bob's point, which it's so helpful to disaggregate data, and I really appreciate how the Department of Education provided the disaggregated data on the latest TN Ready scores. And apart from sadly, what wasn't surprising, seeing that our lower income and our poverty families and children were suffering from achievement and obviously opportunity gaps. But I was really surprised at the non-economically disadvantaged number, which was only 38% proficient in third grade literacy. The non-economically disadvantaged. So with that, I realized, wow, we need some more. Not only do we need targeted resources and targeted approaches, but we also need to be thinking about universal approaches, like a great teacher in every classroom, like Tom was talking about at the beginning, because a lot of our children are lagging.
Blair, you're right about that. I mean, just one quick piece of information. Tennessee now has one of the hardest state tests in the country. The 10 Ready test is so difficult that the NWEA, which is a national testing company, did a correlation study and said you have to be at about the 75th percentile of the country to be on track or proficient on Tennessee's test, which does not excuse the rates. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it is important to know that you basically have to be ahead of 75% of kids your age in the whole nation to be on track for 10 Ready, which I think explains why even a lot of middle income communities are not at 100% or what have you, like they were in the old days under the easy test. We have an extremely hard test now, but so I think the relative proficiency correlation based on the income is kind of what I have in mind. But I just, as for context, I wanted to share that. But I think you're certainly right. If we want to be Lake Wobegon and for every kid in Tennessee to be above the national average, then we have a long way to go in our universal approaches.
And so in the interest of time, we have about 8 minutes left, and I want to make sure we really, Dominique isn't left to categorize all these on our own and then send it out, and then we all go, whoa, this isn't what we wanted. So if we could start working through categorizing these different areas into the must-haves, the should-haves, the nice-to-haves, and the long shots, that would be really helpful. So again, must-have, should-have, nice-to-have, and long shot.
And if it's okay, I will just kind of do it like I've been, if you all said that here and then I will take it after this meeting and put it in the categories and send it back. Is that okay?
That'd be great. And I think
going back
for the elements, agreed. And so for those elements, for those different areas that some of you brought up, if you feel really strongly, and even if you didn't bring them up, if you feel really strongly about where they should sit, please speak up now. And the goal would be to have each of these elements or bullet points categorized into must have, should have, nice to have, and long shot. And the quicker we do that, then we might even get a few minutes of our life back and get ready for Thanksgiving early.
I just have a suggestion, Dominique. I don't know if you mentioned it already, but I think the quickest way to help support you in that is if we could just categorize it with M for must have, S for should have, N for nice to have, and L for long shot. And that way you can categorize it later, put it in the actual categories later.
That's perfect.
And that'll make us go quicker too.
Yes, I love it.
And
so we can start from the top. What do we think about the first one?
What is long shot based on?
So I gave an example of giving facility support for the wraparound infrastructure, even outside of the school buildings. To me, that's a long shot in terms of the likelihood that we would be able to get resources to fit into that, at least for this first round of how we're thinking about reshaping the funding formula. While I believe that's something that would be great for all of our kids, I do think it's a long shot to see that happen in the near future. So I'm hopeful that that might be the only long shot, because it'd be great for us to really include all of what we're talking about. It'd be even great if that were just a should have, but I know the reality is that it's not. Is that helpful, Blair?
And it could be
I was
that
being I was just sort of a little bit challenging the question, because long shot based on whose perception of what's a long shot? Is it, do we think Governor Lee would accept it? Do we think our General Assembly would pass it? Does it need to be, is it not fiscally responsible or conservative enough? You sort of against what criteria? And I don't really mean to be troublesome, but just to sort of say, what do we think is important seems more what the capacity for this group to understand is.
Yeah, I totally hear that. At least my perspective is long shot in terms of, as a committee, once it leaves this room, the likelihood that it would stand. Not based on legislature, not based on, and Dominique, I know you've been in other committees, would love to get your thoughts on how it's been interpreted, because that'd be helpful for us.
The other committees that I've worked with so far haven't actually gotten to the categorizing space. So you all are just a little bit ahead. They're still they have their list, but, I do wonder if something is in a long shot bucket and then multiple people put it in a long shot bucket from these subcommittees, maybe that will stand out as important. That's just a thought. Did they have anything different in the PowerPoint? I wanted to go back really quickly. No, I didn't. I was going back to see if there was anything different in that. But I don't think that there's a wrong way right now, because you can revisit this list through this process. So just because you categorize something somewhere today doesn't mean that that's where it has to stay. So I think we just get a general categorized list from the great list that you all started. And then as you start narrowing in and looking at, this with a finer tooth comb, you may change these. So nothing is in stone here today.
And you know what, Dominique, I'm having a second thought around, I'm looking at just what we want to cover for our next meeting. And some of that is still categorizing and building off of this. And so I'm wondering, as a educator, we're all different. We all learn differently. Some of us want to really spend more time looking at this and reflecting on this, maybe not even publicly in this group. And so I'm wondering if we can just share out what we have, if this could be sent to the group, Dominique, and then we could on our own categorize them how we think they should be categorized, and we could start the next meeting that way, sharing out what we sort of go line by line and call out how we want those to be categorized. And then that way we could also get input from those of you that might not feel comfortable speaking in this setting, but you could at least share even via email your feedback. How does that sound? Or are there any objections to that?
Sounds good.
No objections, but I did want to add, Derwin, at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned arts education. It's not a part of this list. So I want to see if we can include arts education.
I actually had misunderstood at the beginning and had already moved that up to a should have.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I can just take it back down to the to the list.
Thank you. Okay, so seeing that there are no objections, we can just, and Dominique, while you do that, I can just speak to the next meeting details. Essentially, we'll meet on December 7th at 11:30 a.m., same place via Microsoft Teams, and we'll go through categorizing this and looking at costing feedback and just a general discussion. But I think if I'm guessing, for the most part, we're gonna spend time categorizing and then thinking through costs around how all of this can happen. So with that, I promised I'd give you some time back. It looks like it's just a minute, and by the time I finish talking, it won't be any of that. But I really, really appreciate you all. Thank you for just a really hearty conversation. Started off pretty quiet, but I knew we were going to get to this place, and so I feel really good about that. And I'm just wishing you all a happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, and looking forward to our next meeting in a few weeks. Have a great day.
And thank you, Dominique, for doing that great note capturing. Much appreciated.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.